I used to shrug off DNA tests, never giving them much thought. I mean, why even bother with them? But then, I realized why they exist, and it was through one of those tests that I uncovered my wife's infidelity. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting in my office, going through several applications for an upcoming opening in our office staff. You see, I'm the regional head of a chemical company that supplies products for weed control, fertilizers, and water conservation in soil. Our business revolves around the farmers who grow the food we eat. With the growing trend toward greener practices, we were the first to have our products certified as completely environmentally safe. Recently, 2 of my staff members' husbands got promoted at their jobs, which meant they had to resign, as they were both moving away within the next 3 months. This created a sense of urgency to find replacements as quickly as possible. Our sales team covers 8 states in the heart of flyover country, and this year, our growth far surpassed what we had planned for. Megan, my executive assistant, popped her head into my office to let me know that all 8 candidates had confirmed their interview times for Monday. "I'm heading out now, good night," she said before leaving. Every Thursday, I travel to one of the states in my region to hold a half-day sales meeting on Friday before heading back home. So, Thursdays have become my wife's night out with her friends, and we've racked up quite a bit in babysitting costs over the years. These weekly trips are essential for providing the personal support my sales reps need when they hit roadblocks or performance issues. And it works. I haven't lost a single team member in 8 years, which is a big win for the company. Today, I had just returned from one of those trips, and I was wrapping up a few things before heading home. For years, the company had been trying to convince me to give up this part of my job, but I always held on to it. I valued the time alone, it gave me space to clear my head. With a know-it-all wife and 3 kids, that quiet time in the car was priceless. Plus, it meant we didn't have to hire a sales manager, and I stayed under budget, which I was proud of. With all 3 kids in junior and senior high, and my eldest daughter, who's the apple of my eye, set to graduate and start at Southeast Missouri University in the fall, things were looking good for our family. She had earned a full scholarship from my employer. My youngest daughter had just turned 16 and was getting ready to take her learner's permit test. Ava, my wife of 20 years, had been working as the executive assistant to the district attorney since before our youngest was even born. The district attorney recently accepted a new position as a federal lawyer, doubling his salary, a smart move if you ask me. He's supposed to start in about 4 months. I never really understood the guy, though. He's around my age but never married. Despite the rumors, I didn't think he was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had been taking our kids every other weekend so Ava and I could have some time to ourselves. When they started, it couldn't have come at a better time. We were at a rough point in our marriage, and my parents figured we needed some alone time. Honestly, it was the best thing they could have done for us. Without their help, I think we might have ended up like so many other couples, just another divorce statistic. Now, we had about 3 months left before Olivia, my oldest, would be heading off to Washington to work in a senator's office for the summer before starting her political science degree. A while back, my dad had jokingly bought Ancestry.com kits for all 3 kids and, with my blessing, sent them off. We all got a good laugh out of it at the time. We knew from the guidelines that a DNA match would only show up if someone related to them had also submitted their DNA into the system. My kids discussed it with me, and I gave them the go-ahead, thinking that we probably had distant relatives out there that we didn't know about or remember. It could lead to something fun and unexpected. Olivia even suggested we keep the results a surprise from their mom until they came in, knowing it might take 5 or 6 months to hear back. This weekend, we were heading to Nashville to check out the Grand Ole Opry and planned to be back by Sunday. My wife had put together this trip as a way to create another special memory for us. I had met Ava during my last year of college, at a football game. Now, I wasn't on the field as a player, no, I was one of those guys you barely notice, selling overpriced snacks to the fans. Ava, on the other hand, was the youngest daughter of one of the medical coaches, so she always had free tickets. That day, she got into some argument with her date, and things escalated over a misunderstanding. The next thing I knew, I was caught in the middle of their little spat. She shoved him, and he stumbled right into me, sending me flying down the concrete steps with my tray of food flipping in the air. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed with my head wrapped up, and the doctor informed me that I had earned 25 stitches thanks to a split forehead. Feeling bad about the whole incident, Ava visited me every day to check on my recovery. By the time I started waking up more regularly, she had already met my whole family. It turned out I had been in a coma for nearly a week because of some internal injuries. As my vision cleared, I saw this beautiful woman standing there. At first, I thought I'd made it to heaven, and she was my guardian angel. Then I noticed my girlfriend, Isabella, standing beside her, and reality hit. Let's just say, Isabella wasn't thrilled with what she saw. I closed my eyes, hoping when I woke up again, Isabella would be gone and that the whole thing was just a weird dream. Well, when I did finally wake up, Isabella was, in fact, gone. She had moved on to find someone else to give her attention to. In a strange way, it felt like my prayers had been answered. Ava, on the other hand, stayed by my side the whole time, never asking for anything in return as I slowly pieced my life back together. Without ever having a formal conversation about it, Ava and I started dating, and things naturally progressed from there. After graduation, I got into sales, and she landed her first job as an executive assistant. At one of her family gatherings, her little cousin asked why she wasn't married yet. Ava's response? Because David hasn't asked me. 3 months later, I was standing at the altar, watching what felt like a goddess walking toward me. Ava, with her 5'8" frame, long blonde hair, striking blue-black eyes, and a figure that made men turn their heads, became my wife as we exchanged our vows. By the time we hit our 5th anniversary, though, we found ourselves on the verge of calling it quits. To this day, I still don't fully understand what was pulling us apart, and as far as I knew, neither did she. Just recently, we were leaving Lambert's after a meal, a place I always thought leaned too hard on its reputation. Sure, they were known for tossing those oversized buns across the room for customers to catch, but the rest of the food? Overcooked and just kind of dated, if you ask me. We had stopped at this tourist trap of a restaurant because it reminded my wife of her mother's cooking. Need I say more? For some reason, Ava reached over and turned off the sound system, which always meant she had something serious on her mind. I pulled my voice recorder out of my jacket pocket, a little habit I had for recording private conversations, just in case I ever needed to back up what was said. David, have you ever thought about having an affair? Ava asked. My first reaction was to wonder where this question was coming from. My second thought was whether she was having an affair herself or knew someone who was. Why had this become such an important topic out of the blue? I had to push those thoughts aside and gather myself before I could respond. Ava, let's be real, I said. Everyone's probably thought about infidelity at one point or another. But the real question is whether I've ever acted on those thoughts. And the answer is no. Why not? She pressed. Because I made vows when we got married, I explained. Those vows meant something to me then, and they still do now. With the way things are these days, Ava countered, marriage vows don't carry the same weight they used to. I think you should let go of them and really consider finding yourself a compatible woman to have an affair with. And if you're worried about guilt, think of this as me giving you my full permission, with no strings attached. It might even help you appreciate our relationship more and give you a deeper understanding of us as a couple. You could enjoy the thrill and excitement of being with someone else without carrying any guilt. I was struggling to process her point of view. It felt like she was saying it was perfectly fine to use someone else for pleasure. That didn't sit right with me. This was a side of Ava I had never seen before, and it was changing the way I viewed her. Answer me this, my dear wife, I said. Why is it so important to you that I have an affair, with your approval, no less? Have I done something so horrible that you're trying to give me an excuse to end our marriage? 5 minutes passed in silence. I switched the sound system back on because the quiet spoke volumes to me. Ava always had an opinion on everything, but now she had nothing to say. It made me wonder even more why she had brought this up. I was starting to believe there was a deeper reason she wanted me to have an affair. But what was it? Whatever it was, something in our lives had gone off track, and I needed to figure it out. We drove for another hour, and when we were about 40 miles from home, she turned the sound system off again. I reached for my recorder and switched it back on. "I'm sorry, David," she said. "I guess I've been reading too many romance novels. Those ideas must have come from that." She turned the music back on, thinking that would close the conversation. The thing is, our kids and I all knew she couldn't stand those books. They had been her mother's favorites, and Ava had always dismissed them as trashy. She would say she was better than that. Whenever her mom passed her the latest romance novel, Ava would just bring it home and toss it in the garbage. As I drove the last 40 miles, I started realizing that I knew next to nothing about her Thursday nights out with the girls. It was never something that seemed important enough to question. On the rare nights I was home, she would gladly adjust her plans to spend time with me. Until now, I had never doubted what she was doing on those nights because I trusted her completely. But after that conversation, I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on during her Thursday outings. Was she out bar hopping with her friends and maybe getting involved in something more questionable, like one-night stands? By the time I got home, I knew I needed to get to the bottom of what was really happening during Ava's girls' nights out. We pulled into the driveway just as my parents arrived with the kids. Once we were all inside, I made rye and cokes for my parents, and we sat around while they shared stories about the weekend they spent with the grandkids. My parents cherish their time with the kids. It's what keeps them feeling young and involved. They always find new things to do together, introducing my parents to experiences they wouldn't normally seek out on their own. After about an hour, my parents were ready to head home, so I walked them out to their car. Just before they left, my dad leaned in and quietly said, "David, when's a good time for us to stop by your office tomorrow for a private chat?" "I've got job interviews lined up all day," I replied. "But how about around 3? "Whatever it is, I'm here to help." "This isn't about your mom and me," my dad whispered. "It has to do with your wife and her youngest daughter. I can't say more right now since Ava's watching us from the window." I nodded and said loud enough for Ava to hear, "That works, Dad. I'll swing by after work, and we can sort it out in about half an hour." After they drove away, I went back inside and grabbed my car keys. I tossed my toolbox into the trunk and called out, "Hey, honey, I need to stop by Dad's tomorrow after work to help him fix something. I might be a little late." "I heard you through the window," Ava said. "No worries, we can eat later." The next day, my parents arrived right on time, and I escorted them into my office. We waited for one of my staff to bring in some coffee, and once it was served, Megan closed the door behind her as she left. My dad looked uneasy as he began, "David, I really regret sending in the kids' DNA. It wasn't a smart move. We got a match for Sophia. She has a grandmother on her biological father's side who's been searching for her son and his descendants." He pulled out a form from Ancestry.com that listed the woman's name and phone number. The news hit me like a punch to the gut, and my dad could see it written all over my face. "Dad, I don't think this is some kind of mistake," I said, trying to process what was happening. "Let's dig into it and see what we find out." I picked up the office phone, set it to speaker, and hit record to make sure I had a permanent record of the call. After 2 rings, someone answered. "Hello, this is David Paul Adams," I said. "I'm looking for Mrs. Martha Smith. I'd like to talk with her about a DNA match through Ancestry.com. "You're speaking to her," the woman replied. "What can I help you with?" "Well, It's kind of complicated, I said. But to keep it simple, I've just learned that my youngest daughter, Sophia, is your granddaughter. Are you talking about Sophia Marie Adams? She asked. Yes, that's right, I confirmed. Then you might know my son, she said. I had to give him up for adoption when I was 15. I might know him if you could tell me his name, I responded. He was adopted by a family with the last name Barrow, she explained. His name was Luke Robert. At that moment, my heart sank, and I could see the shock in my parents' eyes. We all knew that name too well. He's alive and doing well, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. He's actually the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. And he's also my wife's boss. I know he's never been married. He's my only child, she said. And I'm in the final stages of lung cancer. I don't have much time left. Would you let Sophia come visit me before I pass? If money is an issue, I'll pay for her ticket. I'd really like to meet her and pass on my estate to her. Mrs. Smith, given the situation, I think it's best if you coordinate with my parents, I said. Since you're only one state away, they can take her for a special weekend trip so you can meet her in person. I just don't feel comfortable letting my daughter make the trip alone. Is there anything else you need from me? Yes, please arrange for a notary statement so my lawyer can conduct a DNA test, Mrs. Smith replied. Because of the significance of Sophia's inheritance, we need to confirm she is who we believe her to be before my will can be adjusted. Not a problem. I'll hand this call over to my dad, I said. He can take care of the details and get directions from you. I stood up and stepped out of my office, handing Megan my personal recorder. Please have this conversation and the rest of the phone call transcribed and notarized, I told her. I need it ready for the divorce court. Should I also arrange the DNA test authorization? Megan asked. She was sharp, as always. She knew the drill. Whenever I activated the recorder, she'd quietly make note of everything. It was a system that had resolved plenty of conflicts in the past. Yes, I said, but we need to keep this quiet for a few weeks. I need to find out exactly what my soon-to-be ex-wife has been up to on her Thursday nights. After that, I walked into my assistant David's office. David, I need to speak with you and your wife as soon as possible, I said. I'll need your help with something personal. David glanced at me and instantly knew it was serious. She should be done dispatching soon, he replied. I'll text her to come over right away. I headed back to my office to finalize arrangements. My parents, using the spare key they had for my house, would pack a bag for Sophia next Friday. I'd pick her up from school and drop her off at their place by 10 a.m. As I was seeing my parents out the door, David's wife, Laura, arrived. I directed her to David's office, telling her I'd join them shortly. Thanks to modern technology, Megan had already transcribed everything and made copies. I handed David and Laura a copy to read, telling them to focus on the conversation between my wife and me first. I also gave Megan the document my dad had received from Ancestry.com and instructed her to add it to my lawyer's growing file. I made sure she knew to find the best lawyer we could get. David and Laura had known Ava and me for years, and today's news hit them hard. Laura and Ava had grown up as neighbors, and while they weren't particularly close, they were well aware of each other's lives. Confronting the reality of what had been hidden for so long was a shock, especially for Laura. Do you think there's still a chance they could be together after all this time? Laura asked. Or do you think it's one of those situations where they got caught up in something and then realized it was a mistake? I'm not sure, I replied, but I'll need both of your help to figure it out. For the next few weeks, David, you'll need to use my company car for your sales trips. And Laura, I'll need to borrow your car, it'll keep things low-key. In the meantime, you'll have to drive David's car. I'll let the company know it's part of his cross-training, so he'll be using it for the next 3 months. You're going to follow your wife on Thursday nights and track everything, aren't you? David asked. She'll still think you're away on business. Exactly, I said. I have a gut feeling it's still going on. Why else would Ava suddenly suggest I have an affair with her blessing? If Barrow hadn't changed jobs, I doubt any of this would have come to light. I have a strong suspicion that Ava is planning to move with Luke Robert Barrow when he takes his new job in St. Louis, I said. If she can frame me for having an affair, it would give her the grounds to file for divorce and come out looking like the innocent one. Wow, Laura replied. I can totally see Ava doing something like that. In today's world, it's all too common to accuse someone of the very thing you're guilty of. It's a clever way to shift attention away from your own wrongdoings. She continued, David, if you catch them together on one of these Thursday nights, give me a call. I'll arrange for a couple of officers to swing by and tell her that you've been in a car accident. That'll give them a chance to file a report about where she and her partner were found and what they were wearing. Trust me, some of the officers would jump at the chance to get back at the district attorney for past issues. Just then, Megan came in and said, Dale Allen Britton left the DA's office 4 months ago because he couldn't stand working with Barrow anymore. He started his own law practice. I've already faxed him everything we've got, and he's waiting for you now, David. Send Dale my best regards, Laura added. Tell him we still miss him. I headed out to meet Dale, the same man who was now challenging the women's rights movement in the Supreme Court over Roe v. Wade. His fresh perspective on the law was shaking things up everywhere. As I drove, things started to fall into place. My marriage with Ava had taken a downturn not long after she started working for Luke Barrow. Coincidentally, that was also around the time I got promoted to sales manager, which required me to travel for 24-hour sales meetings. If their affair had been going on all those Thursday nights, I had unknowingly been a witness to it for over 15 years. They must have been laughing at me behind my back. The expensive Christmas and birthday gifts from Luke to Ava suddenly made sense. When I pulled up, Dale was already outside waiting for me. Laura had clearly filled him in on everything. He even gave me access to Luke Barrow's house, along with the code to disable the alarm if it happened to be set. He handed me a slip of paper with a phone number on it and told me it would connect me with people who could help, for a reasonable price. He said he'd already spoken with them, and they were expecting my call. Dale explained that growing up on the streets had given him connections to get things done when needed. The codes for Barrow's house would remain valid until the end of next week, after which Luke would get his usual reminder to change them. Dale had big plans. He was gearing up to sue Barrow for child support from the day Sophia was born. That would hit Luke hard, financially speaking, because under state law, this debt couldn't be wiped out by filing for bankruptcy. If Dale succeeded, Luke would be broke by the time it was over. He also intended to file a lawsuit against Ava for her inappropriate relationship, marital abandonment, and fraud for passing off Luke's daughter as mine. Dale even suggested we temporarily sign over my parental rights for Sophia to my parents until the legal case was settled. I asked him why, and Dale explained, this way, they can't accuse you of using Sophia as a pawn. Trust me, Luke will come after you with everything he's got, just like he does with every lowlife that crosses his path, always handing out the harshest punishments for the smallest offenses. Sometimes, the best defense is a strong offense. I offered to put down a deposit using my debit card, but Dale shook his head. Your wife would see it immediately and start putting the pieces together. Instead, write me a check. I'll hold on to it until after they've been served. As I left Dale's office, it hit me that everything he was doing was designed to give me the upper hand, buying me time to gather the information I needed. Megan had definitely found the best person for this job. I couldn't shake the feeling that Dale had his own reasons for going after Luke Barrow so aggressively. Both Ava and Luke were about to face a whirlwind of consequences they never saw coming. Dale had just set the stage for his own version of the divorce game. I finished all the paperwork to temporarily transfer parental rights over Sophia to my parents, starting Friday. I made sure they had a copy and went over the situation with them. After Dale and I explained everything, they agreed it was the best course of action. I was waiting for Laura to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus. David had already left on his first sales trip, and the plan was for Laura to leave her car with me while she took David's car home. My eldest had informed me that their mother wasn't coming home for dinner since she was heading out with the girls straight after work. As soon as Laura arrived, we swapped cars, and I tossed my suitcase into the trunk. "David's ready," she said. "Dispatch and the guys just need the location." "Thanks," I replied. Dale said to give him a call if it's a go so he can serve them himself. "I'm curious," Laura said, "why is Dale so set on taking down Luke Barrow?" "For Dale, it's about principle," she explained. "Luke has a hard time standing by his word." It was almost satisfying to watch Ava and Luke leave in separate cars, both heading to Charlie's Grill bar. They were there to enjoy a steak dinner, but after that, they went their separate ways. I drove to Luke Barrow's house and waited. Dale's friends, who were now part of my team, had everything set up. I found a safe spot with a clear view of Luke's place. Ava arrived first, entering the code to disable the alarm before unlocking the door with her key. We filmed her just long enough to catch her going inside. 10 minutes later, Luke showed up, and Ava opened the door to greet him. They kissed, and as soon as the door shut behind them, I stopped filming. Inside Luke's house, 6 out of 8 rooms had been wired for both video and audio surveillance. One of Luke's neighbors, whose son was serving time, had let us use his place as our headquarters. Everything happening inside Barrow's house was being streamed live to a private Facebook page connected to our team. What we discovered was that Ava had hired a team to follow my car, likely because she suspected I might take her bait and start looking for a new romantic interest. They had even hired an escort who knew my preferences, thinking I'd fall for the setup tonight. I quickly sent a message to Laura, letting her know what I'd overheard. She immediately called David to warn him that he was being watched. As a former Marine, David knew exactly what to do. He drove his car off the road around 10 o'clock at night, making it look like an accident, and called for a tow truck to get him back on track. Then, he called his wife to report the incident, and she texted me with the details. I confirmed that everything was a go and sent them the address. While waiting for the rest of the plan to unfold, I snuck over to Barrow's house and deflated all 4 tires on their cars by removing the valve stems. That way, they wouldn't be able to leave in a hurry or clean up any of the mess they were about to be caught in. When the police finally arrived, their blue lights flashing, they knocked on the door and asked for Ava Adams. Luke tried to deny she was there until the officers pointed out her car parked in the driveway. Eventually, Ava came to the door, wrapped in nothing but a bedsheet. "Mrs. Ava Adams," the officer said, "your husband, David Paul Adams, was involved in a motor vehicle accident just outside Little Rock, Arkansas. Your parents suggested we check here when we couldn't locate you." I took great satisfaction in watching Ava's face go pale. The officer had intentionally thrown her off, creating just enough discomfort to leave both her and Luke unsettled. After they were done, the police got back in their cruiser and drove off, with me following close behind. The entire encounter, from the moment the officers arrived to the second they left, had been recorded and live-streamed on Facebook. We now had solid proof that the affair was still going strong, and so did a good chunk of the folks in Cape. It was just past midnight when my eldest daughter, Olivia, called. "Dad, Mom's not home yet, and my calls are going straight to voicemail. I'm starting to get worried, she's usually not this late. What should I do?" I replied with a quick text, sending her Luke Barrow's number. "What does her boss have to do with this?" Olivia asked. "He's been her Thursday night boyfriend for over 16 years, I said bluntly before ending the call. I followed up by texting Olivia a clip from the live stream. It showed Ava wrapped in a bedsheet, talking to the police, while Luke Barrow stood there in nothing but pajama bottoms. All of this was done from a burner phone to keep things discreet. 10 minutes later, Olivia called back. Mom's phone suddenly started working again. She called me and said she's on Lower East Broadway with 4 flat tires. I knew she was lying, so I told her, that can't be right, Lower East Broadway isn't anywhere near Luke Barrow's house. Olivia said her mom insisted she was telling the truth, so I mentioned that I'd seen a video of her and her lover talking to the police. Ava, confused, asked what video, so I sent it to her. When she saw it, she had no explanation for why she was wrapped in a bedsheet. I wouldn't expect her home for a while, I told Olivia. But could you do me a favor and open the front door for me? I was just getting out of the car when Olivia spotted me. She watched as I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and walked toward her. Just as I set it down, my phone rang. It was Dale Allen Britton. I put him on speaker. David, I just served them both at Barrow's house, Dale said. Your wife and her lover are now under a restraining order. They can't come within 500 feet of you or any of your children. I'll notify the Cape Police Department and head home. Do yourself a favor, don't speak to her at all. If she shows up, even just to get her clothes, call the cops. Understood, I replied. And my eldest daughter knows too. Thanks, Dale. I turned to Olivia and said, go ahead and open the garage. I need to move Laura's car in. Remember, I'm supposed to be in Little Rock. We did just that. As we were finishing up, my younger daughter, Annie, asked, Dad, is that why the locksmith came around 6 to change the locks? Yeah, it was a last-minute decision, I said. I had Megan arrange it once it became clear that things were going down just like we planned. What kicked all of this off? Annie inquired. I explained, the DNA test your grandfather sent to Ancestry. They found a match for Sophia. He told me about it at work on Monday. When I contacted the woman, I learned that your mother's boss is her son, the one she gave up for adoption when she was 15. At this point, Olivia lost it. I held her tightly until she calmed down. Once things settled, we dimmed the lights and retreated to the kitchen for a quieter conversation. I turned on my voice recorder and let Olivia listen to the conversation I had with her mother on the drive back from Nashville. Hearing her mom's words out loud was a revelation. Why would Mom want you to have an affair, Dad? Olivia asked. To avoid facing the consequences of her own actions if they ever came to light, I replied. It's unfortunate, but her suggestion ended up exposing the very truth she was trying to hide. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Since I wasn't supposed to be home, Olivia went to answer it. A police officer stood there and informed us that they had stopped a taxi carrying Ava. She had been warned that continuing would violate a court order. My eldest daughter and I spent the rest of the night talking about everything. We couldn't help but laugh at how, in a different life, Ava could have been a fantastic writer. She always had some story to share from her so-called girls' nights out. I still can't believe Mom's been having an affair with the same man for over 16 years, Olivia said, shaking her head. How did we not see it? It's simple, I replied. You kids were young, and I was on the road every week, traveling for work. As a sales manager, I had meetings in different states, so I didn't think twice about your mom going out with her friends. I trusted her completely. We all did, Annie added. That's what made it so easy for her to get away with it. I sat there in disbelief, realizing how much our trust had blinded us. If Olivia hadn't pointed it out, I might never have seen it. Ava had used our faith in her as a shield, and that allowed her to keep the affair going for so long. Seeing the sadness in my eyes, Olivia softly said, that's the hardest part to accept. It's not just the cheating or the lies, it's knowing that she used the trust we had in her as a tool to keep her real relationship going. The one that actually mattered to her. If your mother could betray someone she claimed to love, I said, just imagine what she'll do to us once she starts resenting us for what's happening now. Annie got up to make us both fresh cups of coffee, and that's when I noticed the dawn starting to break. My phone buzzed with a text notification. It's from your mother, I said. She wants to talk as soon as possible. Apparently, there's an issue at home with one of you that we need to discuss before I get back from my trip. How are you going to respond? Olivia asked, her voice tinged with concern. I typed out my reply, saying aloud, "Don't worry, be happy. You and Luke can still laugh about the big doofus behind my back. You can still move to St. Louis with Luke Barrow, just not with our kids." Olivia stared at me in disbelief. Your mother doesn't need me anymore, I explained. My usefulness to her has ended. She wanted me to have an affair so she could use it against me in divorce court. What she didn't expect was to get caught herself. It was hard for Olivia to hear those words. Facing the truth is never easy, and sometimes people lash out at the one who reveals it because the truth can hurt. But with time, acceptance eventually comes. I stood up and held Olivia as she broke down in tears again. We managed to calm her down just as Matthew and Sophia started to stir upstairs. I switched on the TV in the kitchen, as I always did, tuning into KVO's Channel 12 for the morning news. Before long, the kids came downstairs for breakfast, surprised to see me home. But what truly caught us all off guard was when my wife's image popped up on the screen. My son turned up the volume, curious about what was being said. I felt a wave of sympathy for my kids as they watched in disbelief. The video showed Luke and Ava mocking me. At one point, Ava bluntly remarked, "The doofus is so clueless, he has no idea what's happening around him." Luke and Ava then made another sarcastic comment, laughing together. But then the news anchor spoke up, "I don't think they're laughing anymore." After 5 hours of live coverage on Facebook, their plan to set David Ward Adams up with a professional escort so his wife could divorce him and take everything he owns has backfired spectacularly. The next scene showed Dale serving them with lawsuits. The reporter went on to explain the nature of the legal actions being taken. That's when Alice, my youngest, ran over to me and climbed into my lap, crying. It was a cruel way for a 16-year-old to find out that her father wasn't her biological dad, and that her mother's long-term lover was. Matthew hit the nail on the head when he said, "If Mom thinks you're just a piece of garbage, what does that make the rest of us?" Once Sophia had calmed down, Olivia helped me explain everything that had happened since Ava and I started our journey back from Nashville. I called their school and arranged for them to be excused from classes on Friday and Monday, giving them time to process everything and come to terms with the situation. Just as we were about to start breakfast, Sophia suddenly said, "Dad, the police chief is on TV." That got all of our attention, so we turned the volume up. The news anchor was announcing that both Ava Adams and Luke Barrow, our district attorney, were now under criminal investigation. A special task force from another county was being put together to lead the inquiry. As I watched, I couldn't help but reflect on how, when someone's private behavior becomes public, it forces society to confront its own hypocrisy. Everyone pretends to be shocked, but deep down, we all know people wear masks every day. After breakfast, once we had tidied up, I sat my 3 kids down at the table. I handed each of them a copy of the letter my dad had received. Then I turned to Sophia and said, "Sophia, my parents are coming to take you to meet your biological grandmother. She's terminally ill, and she wants to see you. There's a lot more to this, but I think it's best if she explains it herself. Just know that, as far as I'm concerned, you are, and always will be, my daughter. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your grandparents." Then I asked Olivia, "Could you help your sister pack for the weekend while I call my parents?" After the girls left, Matthew looked at me and asked, "Dad, how are you handling all of this?" "I'm not," I said, letting out a heavy breath. "I'm barely keeping it together. But remember this, son, if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, you have to stay strong, for everyone else in your life." With that, I called my parents and explained the situation. They assured me they'd be over as soon as they finished packing their car, and they still had an hour before their flight. What I didn't realize at that moment was that my relationship with my son had changed forever, and for the better. The three of us stood by and watched as the daughter I had raised left with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the very first time. I prayed it would be a positive experience for her, and that when she came back, she'd still feel the same way about me. Meanwhile, at the district attorney's office, the atmosphere was as cold as a morgue. Ava had gone shopping for new clothes after having her car towed and getting the tires fixed. Luke Barrow, on the other hand, was busy reviewing the lawsuit filed against him. Although they didn't have a direct DNA sample, the evidence of his biological connection to Sophia was undeniable, and he couldn't refute his paternity. The entire staff at the office was now aware of the truth about their affair and the concealed parentage of Sophia. The situation was quickly spiraling into a political disaster. Under the law, the definition of fraud had expanded to include the failure to disclose relevant facts, and Dale was suing both Ava and Luke in a joint civil lawsuit. It seemed more and more like the two of them had been deceiving me for years. Every lawyer Luke consulted told him the same thing: David Adams and Dale Britton were very likely to win their case. What made it worse for him was that most lawyers didn't want to touch the case, as word had already spread about Dale's track record as a defendant. Many legal defenses relied on the ability to argue a specific pattern of facts, but once Dale got into the courtroom, it was clear that most would have no defense left by the time he finished presenting his case. The exposure of their actions on Facebook, along with their open admission that they were trying to ruin an honest man to take control of his assets, might not have caused much of a stir under normal circumstances. But given Luke Barrow's social standing, it quickly became front-page news. Ava had just left her favorite boutique, a place she had frequented for years because of its quality and unique clothing. As she exited the store, a woman approached her and, with a hint of disbelief, asked if Ava had lost her mind, implying that she should have known her actions would lead to disaster. Confused, Ava asked what she meant, only to find out that she had become a star on Facebook. Her face and actions had been circulating for at least 5 hours. When Ava returned to Luke's house around 1 p.m., she noticed that a service company was just finishing up their work. The employees had mistakenly assumed she was the homeowner and advised her and her husband to reset all the security codes. It wasn't until after they left that Ava realized something odd: they hadn't asked for her electronic signature to confirm the visit. She immediately called Luke, worried about his upcoming position in St. Louis. When he asked why, she told him about the strange encounter with the service company. It was then that they both started to suspect there was more going on than just David trying to protect himself. They knew that Luke's new job was a political appointment, potentially tied to the deep state. After making herself a cup of coffee, Ava sat down to review the divorce petition. The first thing that struck her was how her own words to David had been the spark that raised his suspicions. He was now questioning why she had encouraged him to hurt and manipulate someone else for personal gain. But the real gut punch came when she saw that David's parents had informed him about the DNA match from Ancestry, which had led him to discover Sophia's true parentage, giving him undeniable proof of the affair. At that moment, Ava realized that David must have pieced together the fact that her actions had been eroding their relationship long before Sophia was born. It dawned on her that David had orchestrated everything that had happened the previous night and was the one responsible for exposing the hidden truths about her life. Just as this revelation hit her, the doorbell rang. When Ava answered, she found it was Mr. Primrose, the neighbor Luke couldn't stand. "Mr. Primrose," she greeted him. "What can I do for you?" With a sly smile, he handed her a legal envelope. "Your husband, David, used my house as his base of operations against you and your long-term lover last night," he said. "I let him because Luke Barrow got my son the maximum sentence for a first-time offense. I thought you'd like to know that the information in that envelope was compiled last night. Oh, and it's also being couriered to every member of your family this afternoon." David wanted me to ask, "Are you still laughing at him now?" Ava watched in shock as Mr. Primrose walked away, a broad grin on his face. Back in the kitchen, she opened the envelope. Inside were photos, clear, undeniable pictures of her entering Luke's house with her key, greeting him at the door when he got home. The evidence was irrefutable, including shots of their intimate moments and even the scene where they were confronted by the police. David's team had been meticulous. The entire setup was so well executed, it looked like he was working hand in hand with law enforcement, possibly pursuing his own vendetta against Luke. But it was the last page in the packet that made Ava's stomach drop. Signed by David, it spelled out the true consequences she hadn't anticipated. If this information went public, it would unravel a series of events neither she nor Luke were prepared to face. Her attempts to manipulate and pressure David into compliance had led to far more severe consequences than she had ever imagined. The pressing question now was how to contain the fallout from David turning all of this into a public spectacle. "Ava," he had written, "I realized last Sunday, after we got home from Nashville, that you were trying to set me up to justify your decision to divorce me. Since then, I've been reflecting on what I might have done to make your love turn into pure hatred. Now I understand. I see that you've been blaming me for the things you felt were missing in your life when we only had 2 children. I believe you felt trapped in this marriage, longing to reclaim the freedom you had when you were single. If that wasn't true, you wouldn't have sought him out, trying to recapture that life. By doing so, you let him take you away from everything you despised about our life for a few hours each week. The only reason you stayed in this marriage with a man you loathed, a man you considered dead, was because Luke never wanted the responsibility of raising children, not even his own. With the way you saw me, there was no chance you'd leave our kids with someone like me. Your pride wouldn't allow it, so you built a life on a foundation of lies. Each time you and Luke got away with it, your contempt for me grew. In your eyes, I became a bigger fool, a bigger idiot. How often did you two laugh at the clueless cuckold? Did you inspire Luke's affection for you by belittling or mocking me? What I can't forgive or forget is the message you and the man you consider your true husband have sent to our children. That damage will stay with them for the rest of their lives. I still can't wrap my head around how much satisfaction you and Luke must have gotten from manipulating our lives, and our children's lives, as if we were nothing but pawns in a game." The KVOS 12 news reporter summed it up perfectly when he asked if the two of you were still laughing at Ava Adams' husband, David Ward Adams. "I watched as Olivia, Matthew, and Sophia saw you and Luke openly reveal your plans for me on television, aided by the media. It broke my heart to see our children witness you laughing and joking about how easily you could take down the foolish, incompetent man you once called your husband. Matthew, our only son, said something that struck me deeply. If Mom thinks you're just a worthless piece of trash that should be crushed into the ground, what does she really think of us? I haven't even begun to think about what your future relationship with our children will look like. For now, I can honestly say it's non-existent. The sheer disgust and disdain you and Luke have shown toward me has ensured that. At least we both know that you're celebrating, reveling in the fact that you've left me with the reputation of a clueless idiot for the rest of my life. Maybe tonight, the two of you can toast to your victory." Ava's hands trembled uncontrollably, causing her to drop the paper. It was as if the words themselves had knocked the wind out of her. She came across as spiteful, bitter, and cruel, someone completely indifferent to the pain she'd caused, not just to her husband, but to their children as well. Her actions revealed a person who cared only about herself and fulfilling her own desires, regardless of the cost. Then the sobs broke the silence in the room. David had always been able to destroy someone's credibility without openly condemning them. Anyone reading this letter would be hard-pressed to argue against his observations of their behavior. To him, it was clear that everything Ava had done was to preserve her lifestyle, not out of love. He must have realized that Luke had been pressuring her to leave him and the kids even before she became pregnant with Sophia. Luke's new job had only sped up their long-term plan. Originally, they'd probably intended to wait until Sophia graduated high school, when the truth about her parentage could come out with fewer consequences. In some ways, David had been right all along. She certainly wasn't laughing anymore. David had managed to lay bare the reality that their own actions validated every word he'd written. It became clear that their disdain for him was the driving force behind their attempts to completely bring him down. Without outright saying it, his letter felt like a declaration of war. If they were going to make him fall, he was determined to take both of them down with him. Ava picked up the divorce petition again and continued reading, her stomach sinking deeper with every line. The allegations were overwhelming: fraud for concealing Sophia's true parentage, emotional and mental abandonment, adultery, and even slander. But what made her truly nauseous was the amount they were demanding in damages for the fraud. If David and his attorney won, both she and Luke would be financially ruined for a long time. It became painfully clear that David was no longer the fool they had always dismissed him as. Saturday was a whirlwind of chaos for my two oldest children and me. From early morning until late afternoon, family members dropped by, showing their support. Ava's parents, her two brothers, one sister, and their spouses all came, each bringing dishes to make sure we had plenty to eat. Even my own brother and sister traveled from out of town to check on me. We were surrounded by love and support, but the shock on everyone's faces was palpable. They couldn't understand how they'd been so misled by Ava for so long. One thing we all agreed on, though: the evidence shared on social media made her spiteful intentions toward me undeniably clear. At one point, my father-in-law and I stepped out onto the back deck with cold beers in hand. "David Ward, let it go," he said softly. "Cora's inside keeping everyone away so you can have some privacy until you've had a chance to settle down." He stayed with me until things finally calmed down. "Cora and I are planning to update our will," he added after a while. "What would have been Ava's share will now be split among your 3 kids. She may be our daughter, but I can't forgive her for what she's become." Just as the last guests left, my phone rang. It was my father. "Sophia met the woman," he said. "You can definitely see a family resemblance. The meeting went well. Mrs. Smith was really interested in your family's situation and got Sophia to open up about her feelings. It was good for her, she's been holding a lot in." Dad went on to explain that the lawyer had gotten the blood sample he needed and had then pulled him aside for a private chat. The lawyer had asked about Luke Barrow, and my dad shared what we all knew. "I found out that Luke's real father is serving a life sentence for killing his lover's husband," my dad said. "Luke would have inherited his biological mother's estate if Sophia hadn't come into the picture." "Don't worry, Dad," I assured him. "Dale Britton has a court order that prohibits Luke from coming within 500 feet of any of us." "It's been a busy day here too," I added. "Lots of family from both sides have come by to show their support. Mrs. Smith is hosting us at her estate. Your mom feels pretty special, being treated so royally. Sophia is with Mrs. Smith now," Dad continued, "and we both really like her. Her lawyer said it's been a long time since he's seen the grand lady smile like that." Before ending the call, my dad said, "David, I had a chance to talk to Martha alone for a bit. She asked me what kind of son you were, so I told her everything I could about your life, openly and honestly. We also discussed what's happened over the past week. She mentioned how you left it up to her to explain to Sophia why she wanted to see her. Martha said it had been a while since someone had shown her the respect you did, and she thanked us for guiding her through how to handle her estate. Martha's plan is to place everything in a trust under Sophia's name, with you managing it until she turns 25, my dad explained. She'll text me when they're leaving, so we'll be sure to be home when they bring her back," I said, wrapping up our call. I then sent a message to Sophia, letting her know how much we all missed her and sending love from Dad. With a little time on our hands, we started tidying up the house just before David and Laura arrived with my car. I had to apologize to Laura for forgetting to return it. "The police chief sees an opportunity to take down Luke Barrow," Laura remarked. "He and Dale are working together, and Dale's handed over some questionable information for the investigators to look into. The staff looked pretty somber when I got back," David added. "I told them that some of us had known about this situation all week and were doing what we could to help. It's been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night," I replied. The kids are still having a hard time adjusting, so I'll be taking Monday off as well. Have you heard from Ava at all? Laura asked. Not since Thursday night, I said. I imagine she and Luke are busy moving on with their lives, especially now that they've made their feelings about us pretty clear. Early Sunday morning, my youngest daughter called to ask if it would be okay for her and her grandparents to return late on Monday. I gave her my approval, provided her grandparents were fine with it. She thanked me for encouraging her to go on the trip, which made me curious. Why are you thanking me? I asked. Mrs. Smith helped me realize it wasn't my fault that I came into this world because of my mother's affair, Sophia explained. She told me we're all innocent victims of their choices, and none of us deserved what's happened. I love you, Daddy, she said before hanging up. By Monday evening, Olivia, Matthew, and I watched as my parents pulled into the driveway. They looked worn out, clearly exhausted from the trip. The moment my mom stepped out of the car, she rushed into my arms, and I couldn't help but feel relieved to have my youngest daughter back home. My dad popped the trunk, and Matthew grabbed Sophia's suitcase, taking it straight to her room. While the kids went into the family room to hear Sophia share stories about her new grandmother, my parents and I moved into the kitchen to catch up. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee while my dad shared his thoughts on Mrs. Martha Smith. She seemed at peace when we left, my dad said. It's like she'd come to terms with her time running out. Meeting Sophia and seeing her accept everything really meant a lot to her. My mom pulled a large envelope from her purse and handed it to me. Her lawyer gave this to me after we said our goodbyes. Martha had specific instructions for you. Inside the envelope was a letter and a check for $50,000. The letter was brief and to the point. Martha expressed her gratitude for honoring her request, saying she had already outlived her expected time before I got in touch. DNA had confirmed the biological connection, and she praised Sophia, calling her a lovely young woman. She thanked me for raising her well and advised me to use the money to help us through this challenging period, urging me to always remain true to my values. I handed the letter to my parents so they could read it. It was surreal, realizing that we had likely fulfilled someone's final wish. As we sipped our coffee, I caught them up on everything that had happened during their trip. I assured them that I felt the worst was behind us, at least emotionally, and that we were ready to return to our normal routine starting the next day. For the rest of the week, things settled into an uneasy calm, considering the circumstances. Ava tried reaching out to each of our children on their cell phones, but they all told her in no uncertain terms not to call again. Corporate headquarters was overjoyed that I was no longer handling the sales meetings, and they wasted no time in searching for a sales manager, for the first time in over a decade. I was in my office reviewing some monthly sales reports when Megan poked her head in. Things have gotten out of hand, she said. I looked up, already feeling a sense of dread. What now? I received an email saying your last letter to Ava was posted online on a southeastern Missouri newspaper's website, Megan said. I quickly navigated to the site, finding a section called Speak Out. Sure enough, there it was, my letter, front and center. Megan came around to read it over my shoulder. By the time she finished, tears had welled up in her eyes. I wrote that when I was feeling emotional, I admitted, maybe I was a bit too harsh. No, David, Megan replied, wiping away a tear. You just presented her long-term behavior in a blunt and honest way. Either of them could have ended it at any point and come clean. But they didn't. Luke benefited from a long-term affair without ever shouldering any of the costs. That's exactly how I saw it, I agreed. It's not often people get to see the impact of someone's actions on their family, so publicly. For everyone who's been through a divorce, like me, this is a brutal reminder of the pain they endured before they could move on, Megan said. Check out the last comment. I scrolled down and read it aloud. As a lifelong feminist, I have fought for equality and empowerment. What this woman and her lover did to her husband and children has forever tarnished our movement. Meanwhile, Ava and Luke were having dinner at Charlie's Bar and Grill, a place usually bustling with people on a Friday night. But tonight was different, empty tables surrounded them. They asked their waitress about the lack of customers. She hesitated before explaining, "People are waiting, but they don't want to be seen sitting near you." She added that many had read the article featuring Mr. Adams' letter to Mrs. Adams on the Southeast Missourian website. That was enough for Ava and Luke. They quickly asked for the bill and left, realizing they would need to avoid public places for a while. They were both starting to grasp how much their actions had shrunk their world. As they exited, Ava spotted her parents sitting at a table, waiting for their meal. She hesitated, but then approached them, with Luke trailing behind. Her father looked up, his face stony. "Mr. Barrow," her father said coldly, "I suggest you take your girl of easy virtue and leave, so my wife and I can enjoy our meal in peace." Ava walked out of the restaurant in tears, finally beginning to understand that some actions can never be undone. The consequences of what she and Luke had done were now irreversible. Once they got back to Luke's place, they went online to read the comments for themselves. It became painfully clear that the public's disdain for them was intense and widespread. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of my car, watching Sophia as she drove. We had left early that morning, heading to Wichita, Kansas, after learning of her grandmother Martha's passing. We were on our way to the airport, where a private plane arranged by the estate was waiting for us. Sophia was taking the news hard, especially since she and Martha had grown close through their frequent phone calls after her last visit. Olivia and Matthew had been incredibly supportive, and the 4 of us had grown closer as a result. They had even been encouraging me to start dating again, but I wasn't in any rush. After everything that had happened, I was content to take things slow, once bitten, twice shy. As for Luke and Ava, they had relocated to St. Louis. The feds allowed Luke to start his new job early, and the county was more than happy to see him go, as long as he paid back over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They were now living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, preparing for the possibility of declaring bankruptcy with the civil suit looming over them. Under Missouri bankruptcy laws, Luke and Ava could only retain $10,000 each in equity. Our divorce was finalized according to state law, and Ava was required to pay child support while the kids were in school. She also had to cover 50% of their living expenses if they stayed on campus. The civil trial for fraud was set to begin in 2 weeks. My children still refused to speak to their mother, and her own family had distanced themselves from her. Ava was learning the hard way that people can only tolerate so much before they decide to walk away for good. Sophia had a meeting arranged by the state's child services with her biological father, which did not go well for him. During the meeting, she told him that her mother had said he was just like his real father, an egotist who shouldn't be near any woman. In front of the child services representatives, Sophia declared that both her mother and biological father were dead to her. After attending her grandmother's funeral, we were informed by the lawyer of the substantial inheritance Sophia would receive, and it was overwhelming for both of us. As the trustee of the estate, I discussed it with my daughter, and we decided to sell her grandmother's house, along with its contents, except for some personal jewelry and a few photographs that Sophia wanted to keep. As the school year drew to a close and I prepared for the first day of court, Sophia came into the den. "Dad, can you arrange a meeting with Luke, Mom, their lawyers, us, and Dale for Tuesday?" she asked. "I think I can, but why?" I replied. "I want them to understand the real consequences of their actions," Sophia said. "Grandma Martha suggested this to me." I called Dale, and we set up the meeting. It was a bright, sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Ava, their lawyers, and Dale. Sophia spoke first, addressing Luke directly. "I asked for this meeting," she began, looking Luke squarely in the eyes. "First of all, here is the address of your father. He wants you to visit him in prison, where he's serving a life sentence for the murder of his lover's husband." She handed Luke a sealed envelope with his name on it. The looks on Luke and Ava's faces were priceless, and Sophia continued without hesitation. Both of you should know that my biological grandmother left me over $100 million, which my father, David Ward Adams, will manage and trust until I turn 25. It would have been yours, Luke, if she hadn't discovered me. But when she learned the truth about how I came into this world, her moral principles shifted, and she cut you out of her will. Sophia paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. In Grandma Martha's eyes, what you both did was disgusting. She turned to Dale. Dale Britton, whom I trust, will be covering my father's legal fees. Then she looked back at her mother and Luke. You could try mediation before we head to court, but if necessary, we're prepared to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. Mom, just because you brought me into this world in sin doesn't mean it's okay for you to think that's acceptable. Thankfully, my biological grandmother helped me understand that it was my father's values, his morality, principles, and standards, that shaped me into who I am. As we left the meeting, I felt an odd mix of pride and humility. Sophia's words were powerful, and she had stood up for herself in a way that left me in awe. Tomorrow didn't matter anymore. Today, I was blessed with what truly mattered, my daughter's strength and integrity.